This is the Yukon Entrepreneur Podcast, and I'm your host, Carrie Johnston, recording today from the traditional territory of Champagne and Ajax First Nations. And my guest today is Kelly. Kelly, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Kelly Milner, and I am in Whitehorse, so a ways away from you, but also in the Yukon. And I'm a business owner. I own a small production company in Whitehorse, Shot in the Dark Productions. I've been doing this basically since 2015, I guess, is when I started as my own business. I've worked in a whole bunch of different fields before then, but yeah, Shot in the Dark has been around for, what is that now? Is that 7 years? Oh my gosh, yeah.
And what is it that Shot in the Dark does?
Well, Shot in the Dark is, I am a production company, primarily in screen media. That sort of covers a lot of different things. I do things that people would expect, like films. But I also do a lot of stuff that I would call storytelling. I call it client-driven storytelling, so helping other people get across ideas or concepts that they might want to be sharing, often in video, but it could be other things. Websites, I've been doing a lot of stuff in the digital space, events, a combination of all three. But sort of bread and butter for me is more films, I guess, would be kind of what sort of keeps the business going the most.
And who's your client base? Where's your market? Is it Yukon? Is it Canada? Is it international?
I would say for my client-driven work, I would say that's mostly in the Yukon. I think that's what is kind of the thing that makes me a value proposition to a lot of local businesses, is that I understand the Northern context. And so, especially when it comes to telling stories as a way to reach different audiences or clients, I think that I can help find ways of telling things in a unique way. I think we've got sort of different perspectives up here. So I like to say I tell stories through a Northern lens, which is, take it or leave it, but that's kind of how I look at things. But I would say that when it comes to my larger film projects, the ones that I sort of initiate and run as a producer, that's definitely a national and an international audience. And so the films that I make certainly are for a much broader audience, and trying to reach them is an interesting part of my job. So.
Cool. And so it's Innovation Week here in the territory, November 21 to 25. And just sort of wondering, what does innovation mean to you?
Innovation. Well, I think like a lot of people, when I first hear that word innovation, I'm always thinking like tech and things like that. And I think what I've come to realize is, for me, I think innovation is something much broader than that. I think innovation is really how you look at something, a problem or an opportunity, and you throw different ideas at it. Maybe it's a new thing or a new idea, or just a way of doing things, or partnerships, like slightly shifting the focus maybe, or coming at it at a different angle. I think that's sometimes innovation. I think we get stuck in these ideas of it being sort of, this is how you do things, right? And there's, we see it all the time in the film world, but it's like, can we do it differently? Can we do it better? Can we look at something and shake things up? It's a bit of, I think innovation is about being a bit of a disruptor, and that's something that I kind of like to do.
And what inspires you about the work that you're doing?
For me, I think, I came to start this business after kind of a very long and windy road that involved, I started out many, many years ago with a journalism degree, and I grew up in the Yukon, came back home with that. And right away, it was one of my first jobs was working for Northern Native Broadcasting and helping create informational videos about land claims, because they were just being signed in the early 1990s. And so I got really inspired and actually quit my job and went back to school and got a degree in science, a master's degree in science, and spent almost, I hate to say it, like 15, 20 years working in land claims implementation. And I think what I realized in that time, it was, how do we talk to each other and how do we explore ideas together in a way that people can really understand? I think that was what I realized a lot of my previous skills as a journalist, but then also understanding some of the complexities of some of the issues that people were facing here. That's kind of what brought me back to starting my own business, because it kind of brought those two worlds together. I think it was the storytelling, but it was also understanding some of these broader issues in the communities. And so I think what really inspires me about the work that I do now, what I can't actually believe it sometimes when I think about some of the projects that I get to work on, is really finding ways to get people to think about ideas in a different way and think about concepts or issues, and maybe change people's minds, change people's behaviors. Maybe even if we're really lucky, we'll change policies or things like that at a government level. But I mean, that's a long shot. But I think it's really about creating these dialogues. And that's what really inspires me about my work.
What bothers you about the current system that your business is operating within?
I don't know if it's necessarily just my business or if it's just generally what I see. I see that people are, from my business, and in order for things to work really well, it takes teams, right? You need lots of different ideas. You need lots of different skills. You need people to be creative and feel free to participate in making something better. And I think that that's partly what I love about my job. I think what I see sometimes as a frustration is how stuck people are in their silos, and also how that, it's being the expert in a certain field and not willing to kind of branch out, maybe try something different. And I see that a lot, especially up here, where we have such a small community. I think if people are really stuck in their ways of doing things, it really limits the potential. And I really love finding people that are willing to kind of bust out of maybe what they think they do every day, and be part of a project or be part of an idea that kind of forces them to be different or come up with a new approach, or be flexible, try something new. So I would say that is probably, it's whether it's in your work or just in your ideas, people stuck in their ways. I think that is the thing that bothers me about the current system, and not being able to talk to each other or listen to each other. And that's maybe sort of a really broad, that's a broad sort of statement, but I think that that's a challenge that I see and a frustration.
But certainly something that I've witnessed, especially during the pandemic, here in the territory, that siloed approach.
Mm-hmm.
So what would it take to transform that? What are some of the seeds that we need to plant? How could we transform that?
I mean, I think the big thing that I've tried to do, and I think it could work. I mean, transforming means sort of changing things, right? And so I think if we're going to change things, we have to figure out ways to make people, and again, I may be talking on a very broad level, but people or organizations incentive to want to do it. Sometimes you have to either make it look like it's going to be fun to do something different, or that there's a value in it. But it's finding ways of communicating that. I think a lot of the work that I did previously, what I saw was when you took sort of punitive approaches or scolding people, or, trying to force people, say, you should do this because you should do it because you should, is often not the right approach. I think it's finding ways to be inviting, and to find, incentivizing that sort of opening of minds, and making it easier for people to see what the benefits are to themselves, and also make it maybe not scary, maybe not as scary as sometimes change can be. I don't know. Does that answer your question? I feel like maybe I rambled there.
No, I really think that it does. And I think, there's a reality that sometimes innovation transformation lives a bit in the abstract, and, it's the idea of, and it's, designing things for emergence so that those things can come through. And it's really what you're talking about.
Mhm.
Canada's in the midst of a pretty big transformation. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released the calls for action. And the report talks about reconciliation coming through the 4 A's. You can think of awareness of our past, acknowledgement of the harm, atonement for the causes, and action to change our behavior. So what does it mean to you as a business owner to demonstrate reconciliation in action?
I mean, I think when it comes to reconciliation, this is a journey that we're all on. And I think for most of Canada, we're really just at the awareness phase. We're just really starting to understand what it is. Even as somebody who grew up in the Yukon, who, understood things like residential school and ended up working in land claims for most of my adult life, it wasn't something I think I was still really just at the awareness phase myself until very recently, because I think I hadn't really acknowledged what it meant for me to be who I am, a settler living in the Yukon, and understanding my own sort of part in that story. And so I think that's where it's the difference between awareness and acknowledgement, because I think acknowledgement is something that we're just starting to come to. We have to come to that as individuals. As for atonement, I think, we do have to look at ways of redressing. And I think in some ways, if we were to look at the Yukon itself, I mean, with our own land claims, it really sets a very good framework for that. But I think we need to really we also need to be fulfilling those agreements and understanding them, everybody, because they set the stage for all of us. I think moving into action is the piece where, for my business, I try to find those ways of making sure that, especially when it comes to storytelling, that I'm finding the right voices, including the right people, creating space for those voices, finding ways of lifting Indigenous storytellers up, including them in my teams in meaningful ways. I think that's one of the things that I've heard time and time again. And I think it's always really, as a business owner, for me, I think I'm always going back. Everything that I do, I have to go back to almost awareness every time. And, it feels like you can go 2 steps forward, but it is a constant questioning and understanding and looking at every situation that you come to. I think we have so much opportunity in the Yukon to be doing things differently. And I think, this is, it is back to that idea of innovation. I think that's really, when I think about things like Innovation Week, we have so much opportunity to be doing things differently with our communities here. And I think that, there's lots of potential. And I think it's exciting if we can all start moving forward together.
Okay, so living in the far north, we have the advantage of seeing Canada from afar and through a unique lens. So what stories or message do you think that Yukon has to share with Canada about entrepreneurship going forward?
Well, I think getting back to what we were just talking about with reconciliation, I think we're in a unique position because of, that we have First Nation governments, we have development corporations, we have structures that are in place that really set a different tone. And it's not something that other people in the rest of Canada really have very much experience with. Realizing my friends that live in places like Toronto or, in most parts of the country, they really don't have they don't even have relationships in any sense with any Indigenous people, let alone governments or businesses, those types of things. And so I think one of the things that we have an opportunity, and we have a way of demonstrating, I mean, not saying that we're perfect, but certainly we're in a position to have a lot more opportunity to try different things. Like back to this idea of innovation, how can we do things differently? How can we shift our ways of operating, especially when it comes to to business or to innovation in a more sort of general way. So I think that's something we could be sharing more with Canada. I think it's a hard thing for the rest of the country to understand. I don't think we understand it ourselves. So I think that, I think if we can start becoming more coherent about it, I think that there's a lot that we can be showing. Recognizing though that, every place is unique. And so the stuff that we learn here probably wouldn't apply in exact same way if it was downtown Toronto or somewhere in the Maritimes or whatever. Every community is different. And so I think that's also part of it, is saying this is how we do things here, and just showing what's possible.
Sharing the story just might lead to some of those perspective shifts, right? Those openness and ways of being.
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to the storytelling
Business.
Yeah, when it comes to my business and the storytelling aspects of it, I think that is definitely something that I think is the value of sharing stories of what we are doing here, because if you can do it in the right way, it can be sort of a compelling way of opening people's minds to the fact that, everything doesn't always have to be the same way that it always has been, and that there is some benefit of changing, because we could be better.
Kelly, thank you so much for your time today and sharing a bit of your story.
No problem. Thank you for asking me.